on the more personal level, a very localized side, who are they going to go to for help? People that worked with them during these disasters. They're going to reach out to the assessor or the mold remediator or the drying company when something happens to their home. So it's all part of the exposure and people being familiar with who you are because of the type of work that you're doing with them.
I think too on that, Lance, they don't. Okay, let's be fair here. There are people within the community, within emergency management, that have never seen the equipment we use.
Yeah.
Yeah, the equipment we use is amazing. We've got all this stuff that dries things. We can remediate, we can restore, but we also have testing equipment, thermal imaging, water moisture meters, ATP. A lot of things that no one has ever seen before. And there's tricks of the sort of best practices of what we do that we can bring the table going. Oh, didn't know that. Yeah. You before you pull down that whole wall, we can find out whether there's moisture in there or not and save you the work. We can actually use science in the cleaning industry, in our industry, across all the different verticals that we work in a way that most emergency managers have never thought about this at all. Because we're trying. We know we were working with local Americans here at the local level, and if we can't help them, they're going to wait on insurance money that's going to take a very long time to come, or they're going to wait on a government or state grant, which will not be sufficient enough for them to survive on. So we want to ensure that when we respond based on evidence and science, that we can help them rebuild, restore, recover in a way that helps them. It saves money, saves lives. And this is an area of emergency management disaster response that I think is a huge opportunity for all of us.
Well, communications is a big problem too. I mean, we've seen during major storms where, towers go down, phone lines go down, communications out. One of the things that we look for on the task force is ham radio operators. It's a basis for communications, and you're talking about technology changing. I just need to show you something. You can see this little tiny box. It's about the size of a piece of gum or a package of gum.
What do you got there, Lance?
This is an actual interface for ham radio that just having this active, I can take a little $100 walkie-talkie and talk any place in the world because I have this in the room with me. So the technology is out there to give us all kinds of resources to do stuff inexpensively, but people don't know about this stuff because there's so many niche markets and areas of interest. I'm a ham operator, but I have this small kit I travel with. I turn it on, and because I have this device in the room, I have international access to communications. I travel with, Doug mentioned it earlier, Command Center. It's providing Wi-Fi and Ethernet communications over cellular. So it takes everything that we do to the next level. I was able to actually go live from the Experience Center because we had the Command Center with us, and we were able to do that. While in the next room over, there were 6,000 people using cell phones that just graduated from Broward County College. So we brought it with us. We brought what we needed, is the point. So you don't have to be the person that's going to go out into the disaster. We also have people that we will be bringing up on our phone systems. We did that in the past. If there's a problem in Region 2 in the United States and we try to follow the FEMA regions, we may activate Region 3 and 4, adjacent regions that are not affected by the problem, to provide phone support and other coordination resources. I've had people from Florida call me and say, we can't get generators or drying equipment. Hang on, let me call my contact in Buffalo, New York. They had the stuff shipped the next day.
And that's a really good point, Lance. The number of disasters that I've deployed to, in my career it's a big number. But the fact that we've tried in certain circumstances, especially when it comes to water damage, to procure equipment, and it's just blown our budgets. It's been unrealistic. The emergency management disaster response teams and capabilities have evolved so much. If you go back to 9/11, 2001, people just turned up to volunteer, and it was virtually after 9/11, and with all the volunteers that descended, into areas of, New York City, all with the best intentions in their heart. We said, right, we've got to,
without training.
yeah. They're there because they had a car and they could drive from somewhere. And then 2005 with Katrina and Doug, you guys, I've got a Southern accent, but you guys probably lived it. I only responded to it. So when I went down to New Orleans, again, volunteers just turned up out of the wazoo. People from everywhere turned up. And it wasn't, and so what we've tried to do, and with these FEMA courses now, it's trying to control the volunteers and get some sort of formalization coordination. So when I work with my students, the people I work with on deployments, those 4 courses that we talked about, they are the basic fun. That's how I can separate those that just volunteer because they've got good hearts, those that have volunteered that really know that we're going to an austere environment. It's going to be tough and there's going to be lots of work to do because they've taken the time to do at least 10 or 12 hours of a FEMA course. That helps us separate who we're going to take or who we're going to invite, because usually you have to be invited. People do turn up. They still turn up today. It's just happened just recently. People turn up because they've got stuff and they think they're doing the right thing, and then there's no coordination. So the idea is that these courses have been used by FEMA and for many of us in emergency management to identify those that we'll bring and take and invite because they've got the 4 certificates. I don't know much else about your background, never met you before, but you're coming because you got those 4 pieces of paper. That's what we're doing. That's our triage system right now in a lot of things that I do. And it's just, and then again, but you've got seconds, as being a leader or decision maker in emergency response, I have virtually seconds to look at someone's credentials and go, yes or no.
Well, it's lessons learned from all this stuff and techniques that you're taught. I mean, an example that, we've talked over numerous times in some of the tabletops are an example of a terrible bus accident, 40 people on a bus. You show up as the first responders. The last question you ask is who's hurt. The first question you ask is who can walk. Otherwise, you have 40 people saying, I'm hurt. Now you have 40 patients. Who can walk? Come over here. Are you hurt? No. You stay here. If you're hurt, go over there. Next, who can't walk? You guys that can walk, go help them. So now you're reassigning resources based on what you have, but it's all about skills that you learn how to coordinate all of that. And that's what this is all about. And we don't want to put anybody in harm's way. We don't want anybody creating a situation because they're not trained. So it's imperative that people that want to be involved, and we applaud you for that, get this very basic training for starters. And we're trying to coordinate this all now and get you trained for free as part of the Normie Pro Task Force. And that's why we're talking, and this goes for everybody, even out on the other social platforms right now. If you're not a Normie member, you're more than welcome, to become part of our team. And that's what we're really looking for. I just want to mention a few other companies that we're working with. Obviously, Best Living Systems has been involved with donating equipment that we've worked with a lot of the military housing. The Sustainable Workforce Alliance, they have grants and are helping us with training. GBAC with Gavin, always on call. I know when Ian came through Florida, they had over 1,000 people they were able to deploy as a workforce, to help out companies that just didn't have enough workers. They didn't have to be highly trained. They had to be able to load garbage bags, haul stuff away, but it was manpower. They were able to provide that. We work with Virtual PBX. It's a phone system that we use, and we work closely with them for our FEMA region type of calling. So these companies are out there, and they're all very interested in helping and being part of what we're doing. So I want to thank all of them publicly for that. I just want to mention it now, and then we'll get back to a few of the other things. If anybody is listening and they're interested in becoming part of the task force and finding out more about the task force, I'm going to give you a phone number that you're going to send a text message to. And the text message you're going to send is join space EPF. The space is not the word space, it's just a space in letters. So it's JOIN space ETF. And you're going to text that to 877-251-2296. and we will gather that information and reach out to you with more information. Doug, I see you popped in the room there for a moment. Got
I
something?
did. Yeah, I did. I just wanted to say just a moment about what we're going to be doing at the experience, because we're going to actually be building some training around the task force. Norma will be there. Hopefully, we're looking at actually driving her into Caesars Forum and having her as part of our booth, so that we can set it up as we would in a disaster recovery situation. And so we're going to be talking more about this ICS training. Dan asked a great question in the room. He said, can these free trainings, could they all be taken together in a day and a half in a group setting? I think we want to work through a way that we can do that. And obviously we want a lot of those folks prepared for what's going to happen at the experience in September. Would love to have them there with their badges.
So what is it? You have to get it up to 60 miles an hour to fit through the door? Is that how that works?
No, this one actually has a door big enough. Remember, Cincinnati, we had to park it outside, but fortunately, Caesars Forum has a door large enough. It's just we have to get a booth twice the size that we had in Fort Lauderdale, so it takes up a lot of room.
Yeah, that thing is a monster. I think we were looking at 10-foot doors and we didn't fit.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And here's another thing that people should be, should know about, Lance. When you deploy in responding to a disaster and you think you know what you're going to do, that's not how it always pans out. And if you think, I've got this piece of equipment, I've got, they know me for this is what I do in my day-to-day normal life, and I'm deploying to help because they want me to help with this. And then suddenly, if I'm the incident commander or I'm leading a team, I'll go, hang on, I need guys to go do this. And I've had people say to me in the middle of a disaster, really bad situation, we didn't come here to do that. I went, yeah, you did. You came in to do whatever I told you to do. So we have, and you can't do that. You really have to be part of the team. If the team leader says, I need this to be done, then he's saying it for a reason. And it may not be what you think you deployed for, but it's definitely what needs to be done. And so many people, when they deploy, you won't see the big picture. You won't see all the moving parts. You won't see everything that's going on. You will fit into a little team or a team somewhere in a certain geographical area, and you'll be told to do this work. As we go through that initial response, as we move into recovery, then it becomes a little bit more defined, less chaotic, and you'll start to then go and do your remediation, restoration type work, your drying work. That will happen, but that's not going to happen in the first week or two with a hurricane, a flood, or a tornado. No way in the world.
Right.
And so it's really important for people to understand that when you deploy, just say yes. Just when they ask you to do something, just say yes, because that means you're coming back. You're going to get invited back, and you're going to get paid for it, and you're going to get to stay there longer, and you can do really well from a business perspective, on these disasters, because they're not just hours or days; they last for weeks and months.
One of the things that I've seen at a lot of emergency sites that I've been to, the piece of equipment that is probably the most welcome there is what they refer to as the canteen, the food trucks that pull in. So.
Yeah, it's interesting, Lance, that in, was it 2004? I got deployed to Indonesia after the earthquake and the tsunami, and I got deployed for 9 weeks. I lost 20 pounds on that deployment. But I remember I lived in a house with 26 other guys, and we got there on day 4 after the earthquake and the tsunami had hit Banda Aceh in Indonesia. So 160,000 dead, 210,000 survived. And I found a chicken, and I followed this chicken, and it laid an egg. And I came back into this house because we were eating boiled rice at that stage with ketchup and anything else we could find as a condiment to spice it up. We had boiled rice, and I had this egg, and I fried this egg, and I put it on top of my boiled rice. And I've never, ever in my life had to share an egg with 26 other people. But I did. And the point is, they wanted to go out and kill the chicken, but I protected that chicken for a number of weeks just so I could collect an egg from it every day. It was pretty special.
Yes, you are. We'll go with that. Well, we've talked about a lot of this high level stuff and, disasters and the type of work and running with chainsaws and stuff like that. But we're talking about remediators, assessors, drying specialists, home inspectors, structural engineers, insurance agents. all of these people belong on this team. They all have a specialty. They all have a reason and a need to be there. And that's really what this is all about. We're trying to coordinate it on our level to work with these bigger entities and to be able to provide help and service. And it does come back, like Gavin says, to help you out with your businesses too.
Really, really good point you just made, Lance. Be able to tell what you do precisely and succinctly. As an incident commander, I do not have the time to, with my team, with what we're doing, to sit there and listen to someone say, I do this, this, and this. I want to know exactly what you do and how you do it, and then you'll be assigned to go do what you need to do. So it's, if you haven't started practicing that, if you're asked let's just say it's a flooding event after a hurricane, with a lot of debris around, and you come up to the incident commander and he'll say, what do you do? You should be able to say, I do this. And now's the time before the disaster to write your elevator pitch, write your half a page, to be able to just say, this is what I do. These are my skill sets, my core competencies. I can do this for you. So the incident commander go over there and start doing it.
Because if you don't do that, you may wind up in the chainsaw division.
Oh, look, I've had people try to haggle and bribe me and all. No, you don't do that. What can you actually do so I can get on with my business of running this disaster response and manage and keep everyone safe and get the job done, and know that I don't have to, because you're not going to get a lot of supervision in a disaster response. You're going to be told you've got this, and this, and that's the job to be done, and you're going to get it done this afternoon or today, whatever it takes. And then tonight, when you go to disasters, you often have like a 7 o'clock in the morning briefing and a 7 o'clock in the evening briefing. So you have a briefing. This is what we're doing today, everyone. And then we have a debrief at 7 o'clock at night around dinner time. How did it go? What else do you need? What have you run out of? Do I need to order more to this? Did anyone get hurt today? What else did you find while we were out there? We saw this and this. Okay. And then that night, the senior sort of decision makers, the managers of the disaster, then start sitting down and say, right, what's the task list for tomorrow? Or what else have we missed? And so, when you go on a disaster, there'll be, it's very common to have a briefing about 7 in the morning and then another one at 7 at night.
Everything that we've been talking about ICS, the Incident Command System, and NIMS, sounds like, for these major disasters, like he's talking about for Guam and Hurricane Sandy and Katrina and this and that. These systems are used every single day all over this country. I mean, it's used internationally too, this program, but every single day, this is used from 1- and 2-man operations for coordination of services, all the way up to the 10,000 firefighters jumping into a fire zone, or bigger. So, everyone that's listening right now, there is a place for you. If you want to be involved, there is a place, there is a skill, there is training and education that we can get for you and get you as part of the team.
Yeah, and I think if people are going through these courses for the very first time and they want to get involved, have some national pride. The Incident Command System was made in America. It was made by the forest fires guys back in the 70s. So this is our system that the world has adopted for emergency management, disaster response. And so, we'll go through and learn that Incident Command System and go, wow, damn, that was made by us. And we gave that to the world. I go around the world in different countries teaching ICS, as it's known, Incident Command System, to the rest of the world, knowing that the history, it came from here. And it's something we should be really proud of because it does help with, again, all the C's, the communication, the collaboration, the coordination. So it's a system that we really, when you get deployed and you're part of it, it's something you should be proud of.
All right. Well, Gavin, I want to thank you for your input and being here with us tonight. We do have a little bit more that we need to talk about in our private session coming up. So I want to thank everybody that spent the time here, especially on the social media platforms that we're all on. And again, I want to remind everybody, if you want more information, please send a text to, and I'll say the number slowly, 877-251-2296. And in the subject, just type in join space ETF, Environmental Task Force. And we will start sending you some information and help you walk through the process. Gavin, I really appreciate you being here. Everybody in the other platforms, I appreciate that. For our Normie members, if you are watching on one of the social platforms, please go to impact.normie.org now so you can get in for the special announcements that we have coming up shortly. And for the rest of you, please stand by in the room. Everybody else, thank you for attending. And I will be back momentarily with our private feed.
Thanks, Lance. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Gavin. Everybody just stand by. I want to welcome today's guest, Dan Reese, who is and I'll use the terminology that he prefers, a wildfire strategist and aviation advisor. So I'm going to say, Dan, say hello to everybody, and I'm going to follow it up with, could you explain what that is? Because it's a big set of terms, and I really want to understand it.
Sure, got it. Well, thank you for having me here today, Lance. So in my career, I finished out mostly in tactical air operations for wildfire events. And after I left, I started a consulting firm, International Wildfire Consulting Group. And that was shortly after I finished running Global Supertanker Services, which ran the 747 Global Supertanker, which was an air tanker, aerial firefighter with a 747. So I help people who call me engage with questions regarding wildfire. Oftentimes it's technology, or it's chemicals, or it's process. It might be, something along the lines of NASA presentations for people who want to engage with NASA, or new equipment like say a fire nozzle. People who want to understand what it takes to engage in the wildfire community is pretty much what I do.
Well, it's interesting. I actually, before we went live here, did a quick research on you with LinkedIn and a few other sources. And just what you're mentioning, it's kind of interesting, where I saw an article that you were involved with for water conservation and firefighting, just by changing the shape of the nozzle. In the stream of the water flow, it cuts it like in a third. So
Correct.
I mean, that's kind of interesting stuff. I'll tell you what, though, some really sharp images and photos of those big planes dropping the fire retardant, on the site. So it's pretty impressive. Anybody watching this, you may want to take a look and find him on LinkedIn. Pretty interesting stuff out there. But before we started today, we were talking a little bit about the difference between the central part of the U.S. and the East Coast and California, which is where you're from. Now, California's been dealing with wildfires forever.
Correct.
The new phenomenon that's affected us on the East Coast, and I'm in New Jersey, is smoke from Canada, hundreds and hundreds of miles away, causing this choking of the air quality, not just outside, but inside of our homes. So what do you see, what we're facing now compared to what you normally deal with in California?
Well, it's clear and beautiful, and a really moderate temperature here, this summer with the weather patterns, which is really nice. I think that El Nino probably has something to do with that. As I watch the news sources and the science research with the polar vortex, collapsing somewhat and changing the airflow and the cooler weather, it's really nice here in California, and we've not had the fires, this year that we've had in the last several years, and the air's been clear. So it's been really nice. A little agonizing to see what's happening on the East Coast and the Eastern Seaboard and in Canada, where we don't typically see that. And ironically, we see a lot of fire on the West Coast, and it's highly publicized, but in the southeast of the United States, there's a huge number of fires there that occur typically annually. Although I don't think in scope and size of what we see here with the integration of the population and what we call the wildland urban interface, but the smoke conditions definitely will get people's attention, and when we start seeing entire towns being razed, like Paradise and Greenville and the towns up in Oregon and now Canada, it definitely starts to get people's attention.
Well, I've seen a big change in, I don't want to say weather patterns, but just because of the way we've been for the last, I'd say 3-4 weeks here in the Northeast, we haven't had rain. I mean, everything's extremely dry. Now, normally for us, June, we usually run that week or 2 or 3 of, we'll run those 85, 90 plus degree temperatures, and they start calling it the heat wave and everything else. We haven't had that, which I'm not complaining about. But the point I'm trying to get to is when these fires produced this smoke that came down on the New York, New Jersey area, we actually got a glimpse of almost the start of what a nuclear winter would look like. And yes, it sounds very dramatic to say that, but we were barely getting to 70 degrees when the normal temperatures are 80, 85 for us here in New Jersey this time of the year. And we were told by the Weather Channel and all the other officials that are talking about it, that there is so much smoke in the air, it's blocking the sun from its normal thermal heating during the day. I mean, I have solar panels on my house, and I see my production was down, at ground level. It was horrible. So this is what you deal with out in California. We're only getting a glimpse of it now. And truthfully, we've been spoiled, out of sight, out of mind. We hear about the fires in California and okay, on with our business. I mean, this brings it home to us. And I think it's an opportunity for you to explain to us what we should be expecting and, what happens, because this may not be just a short-term thing. It may continue.
No, unfortunately, I would say that for the people on the East Coast, you're in it for the long haul until such time that the weather patterns change and these fires are naturally mitigated. We can make a difference. When I say we, and the fire service can make a difference when these fires are smaller, when they are in their incipient stages, when we get on and we can handle aggressive initial attack, and we've got the weather, in our favor to be able to make that attack successful. Unfortunately, what most people don't realize is once these fires become of that magnitude and size to where they're calling them mega fires, we can black the sky out with aluminum, meaning air tankers and aircraft, and that's all limited. And the bigger they get in scope, the more resources they demand. And we have a finite number of resources internationally and nationally, whether it's in Canada or the United States. No one agency can be fully prepared for this type of event, right? We have agreements that are between local agencies. We have state agreements. We have federal agreements. We have international agreements where we have standardization that takes place for everybody to engage. But when we lack the capacity to adequately attack these fires when we can, that will cost us, and trying to build capacity during the event is just impossible. And once these events get up and running, they become very, very expensive. So the catch really when they get this big is that we need the capacity to keep fires small when they first start. And when they get this big and they draw this many resources, we have in the fire service what we call drawdown, meaning we've drawn the resources so thin that now our ability to rapidly and successfully initial attack fires becomes compromised because we just don't have the resources there to do it. So for my small part of life here on Earth and the fires that I've had to deal with in these quote nuclear winters, and my first experience with that really was in 1987. And the scientists actually came out in the Happy Camp in the Klamath area of Northern California to study what a nuclear winter would be like. where we had these major fires going in August, and we have what are called inversions. So anybody that's been camping and seen a campfire burn, the smoke will rise and then it'll kind of flatten out and form a haze. And that's what you're seeing here, only on a massive scale. And it does get cold. Unfortunately, those fires burn, they continue to burn under those inversions. And then when the inversion gets hot enough, we have what we call an inversion break, where all of a sudden the air will escape up through the inversion and the fire takes off madly for several hours under the inversion. But once they get to that point, it makes it very difficult for aviation resources to be successful to even get in to help the people on the ground, because it's just so smoky. We can't safely operate those aircraft in those spaces. So unfortunately, I think right now it's going to be enduring, right? The population that's being impacted there on the East Coast and the central United States and Canada are at a point, unfortunately, where they're going to have to endure until Mother Nature changes her mind.
What you're talking about resource-wise, is this what's caused some of the problems in Canada, not being able to get a handle on these fires?
Well, I think it's important to put a couple of things in perspective. Fires traditionally need to burn. I mean, that's one way that Mother Nature, takes care of dead and dying material, beetle kill. There's a lot of reasons for fire to burn that's good. Managing fire during peak burning conditions is almost virtually impossible. It only takes a few degrees of relative humidity, meaning the moisture in the air, or a change in wind to really affect what a fire does. So when we talk about resources and capacity, it becomes part of a matter of perspective. It's kind of like insurance, right? Do we want to spend money to build capacity so that when these events happen, we can really go after them? Or do we bet on the come that it's not going to happen? And unfortunately, when we listen to climatologists and scientists around the world and we experience what we're experiencing, where we see years and years and years of dry weather, where we see reservoirs drying up, where we see millions of trees dying, that just all adds to the fuel, no pun intended, for these fires to really take hold and go. And there's two ways fires are put out. A, Mother Nature lets them die out naturally, or B, there are firefighters on the ground that actually go dig those fires out and around to make them go away. So capacity, I think in Canada right now, you're seeing probably firefighters from around the world responding. I know that aviation resources and hundreds of firefighters from the United States are battling those blazes. And I'm sure that there are people from Australia and probably many other countries engaging to help, Canada. And it's not just a regional North American problem right now. We're having this problem. We don't see it, in Siberia, in Asia, in Europe, where you see fires, burning in Germany, where they don't typically burn. And when that doesn't happen, people don't think that they need to get prepared because they don't think it's going to impact them. And unfortunately, for those on the eastern seaboard here in the United States, that they don't really realize the impact that they are contributing to, say, tax-wise, right? We have realized and unrealized costs of fire suppression in this country in the tune of tens of billions of dollars a year, which really affects the GDP of the United States. So wildfire is a big problem, whether you're experiencing that smoke or not. We're all going to pay for it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And to bring it down to a level where people watching this will have something in common with, recently we had the heavy smoke conditions. And that's what I'm going to call the smoke conditions. And they were telling people, stay inside, avoid going outside. Now, we know from the indoor air quality side of our industry that the inside air is normally up to 10 times more polluted than the outside air. So we're already now telling people to stay in an environment that we know is more polluted than the normal outside air for them breathing. We have sensitized individuals. There's a whole class of people that suffer because of that. But also because of the building codes, commercial buildings, public apartment complexes need to bring in fresh air on their heating and air conditioning. So now the systems that are ventilating the inside of their buildings are bringing in this air from outside, which is all smoke, VOC laden with chemistries. And that's a whole nother side that nobody's prepared for, because you still have to breathe. You can't hold your breath for 5-6 days. That doesn't happen. And we use an example in some of our teachings about the importance of breathing. And we say some people are able to go 20, 30, 40 days without eating, 3, 5, 7 days without water, 4 to 6 minutes without air.
Correct.
So it's not like you can avoid breathing. So you have to do things that are going to help. And that comes back to your point before about preparing ahead of time. We don't spend the money on the resources. I've been involved with the government world for many, many years from my background, and money was not usually spent on preparedness. It was always throw money at it when there was a problem. And to your point, if you don't stop these things when they're very small, they become unmanageable.
Correct. Capacity it's a big deal, right? Being prepared both nationally and internationally is extremely important. My background really, I put myself through school fighting fire, and putting myself through school, I became a critical care nurse. And so I worked as a critical care nurse for several years prior to me becoming a firefighter. So it's concerning to me. I have 2 children, one 16 and one 19. And we were impacted, for instance, by the Camp Fire, which burned the town of Paradise down. And in that fire, I think there were upwards of 20,000 structures that were burned to the ground and 80 some odd lives lost. And that fire burned into my town. That's where it stopped. But my children were exposed to something that I chose to expose myself to as a professional firefighter. And that's unnerving, because it's not just the smoke that you burn, that one breathes in the minute. It's the side effects many years down the road that impact, firefighters. And firefighters are notoriously prone to all different kinds of cancers, and they're called assumptive conditions that the government pays for when we get it, and oftentimes our lives are cut short. So that's what goes through my mind. And personally, when we were inundated with that kind of smoke, I did limit my children going out, because the air, like it or not, was worse outside. I did ensure that they were wearing N95 masks, similar to what people did, and I'm sure have in their possession as a result of COVID. Anything to be able to catch that particulate, changing out the filters, regularly in my home. Those were all things that were, top on my mind, just from my medical background and being conscientious of my firefighters when I was in the station, as it related to, diesel exhaust fumes in the bays when we were pulling engines out or pulling engines in, right? That wasn't a place to idle, because we just didn't want to be breathing that. Same for the public.
There's an educational component that is missing in many industries. And in our industry, again, out of sight, out of mind, because you don't see the microscopic particulate and organisms and everything else that you inhale, people don't think about it. But when you're dealing with the fires, again, when it's in California, here on the East Coast, we don't think about it. We don't see it. It's not affecting us on a daily basis. But the submicron particles that are in these smoke plumes that are going out, they go straight into your lungs, and they pass right into your blood system and all the chemistries that are associated with them.
And there's
that's
thousands.
What's that?
There's thousands of these, even just from a burning pine tree.
Well, and I've heard people even talk about, well, it's a campfire or it's a fire pit. We do this all the time. Well, that's true. But the factory up the street that burned with ethyl methyl nasty stuff in it, that's now aerosolized in the flames, that's the stuff that's involved in what you're breathing, because of the homes that burn, the factories that burn, and all the things that are inside of it, just the glues that are in the furniture, that you're sitting on. is all poisonous to inhale. And again, to me, it's an educational piece that people don't understand about emergency medical services, about law enforcement, about firefighting, that I look at this as an opportunity to provide awareness. Something as simple as a firefighter coming out of a burning building, the last thing you would want to do is cool him down by hosing off his turnout gear while he's wearing it.
Or give him a hug.
Or
her
give
a
him a hug. That
Right,
jacket
yeah.
could be 300, 400, 500 degrees. As soon as you hose it down with water, you've created instant steam and you've scalded that individual.
Well, the technology has changed drastically, from the time when I was a young firefighter. Nomex was just coming out, and that's the protective clothing that wildland firefighters wear. And my first several years of fighting fire, I did not wear Nomex. And then when I was in the structure world, in the municipal world, I had one set of turnouts, and those turnouts were by my bed, by my bunk. When the bell rang, I would jump into them and go to a call and come back and peel them down, put them right next to my bunk, and go to bed. That's just not the case anymore with what science has shown us and the medical world. Now, firefighters typically have two sets of turnouts, and they rotate them through structure fires, and they go right to the extraction machine, and they have to go out and be professionally extracted if you're following an FPA every now and then. I used to go do school programs with the kids, and I'd have my turnouts and let them get in it. Turnouts are the gear, that we wear, and let them touch and feel and see. And now that's even been outlawed, where, nothing that's been in a fire like that can go into a school. It's new turnouts that have never been exposed to smoke. A lot of changes environmentally in our profession, which, I think it's important for the public to understand the reasons for that. And it's important for the public to protect themselves as well, such as the things we just talked about: changing filters, not going outside, having your kids wear a mask. I mean, if I have two masks and I'm going out with, two kids, well, the kids are going to wear the mask, not me. I'm going to endure that change. But it's a matter of perspective and doing what you can to research on your own. Read about the effects of smoke and what science is showing. Read about the cost of fires and what's causing it. And it's a very complex, wildfire is very complex, simply because there are those fires that need to burn, and there are those fires that probably should be put out.
From your experience in California, your years firefighting, and from dealing with the smoke out in the California area, what would you say to the people in the middle part of the country and the East Coast that have experienced this? And the wind could shift tomorrow, and the fires that are still burning could cause this to come down on us again. What would you recommend them doing as far as indoor and outdoor air quality, and what things to be aware of odor-wise and things like that?
Well, wildfire smoke has, in my experience, two different kind of smells. There's a smell when a fire is going through a residential community, for instance, when we have many homes burning and it smells like a structure fire, or if anyone's thrown, plastic garbage and things into a campfire, you kind of have that acrid smell. And that's the nasty stuff that you don't want to see burning, and you definitely don't want your children burning. As firefighters, sometimes we can't get out of those situations where my firefighters could put on a self-contained breathing apparatus. We call them SCBAs. Until that smoke was clear, that's what they did, and their turnouts were washed. So for those in the public, it really is limiting your exposure outside when you're listening to the environmental air pollution control advisories. Those people that are susceptible to lung issues and problems, I would speak to your doctor. I would see what kind of HEPA filtration systems that could be put into your homes, to help filter that smoke in your homes. And once again, my children, I put them into masks, no different than when they were in COVID, when they were walking around out there, when they had to be out. Otherwise, I kept them indoors.
Yeah, just to a point that you just made about wearing masks, the N95 masks, N100 masks, whatever you're able to get, they work great for particulates, but they don't do anything for the VOCs, the volatile organic compounds, which is the gases and the chemistry in the air.
Right.
That you need scuba gear, like you're talking about, self-contained breathing apparatus.
Mhm.
And the public isn't going to wear that.
No.
So staying inside, it's really your best bet, at this point, and try to avoid these situations if possible.
Agreed.
All right. Well, I really appreciate your time. This is all about a public education and awareness that we're trying to push out there. There's many other segments that we will be playing following this. And I really wanted to set the stage, which is, I feel we've done that, as to the problem that's out there. It's not going away. It wasn't the 3 or 4 days that we had here, and the problem's never going to come back. It's things that we need to be aware of.
Correct.
And I really appreciate your time and help with that.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me today, Lance. Appreciate it.
Be safe, and good luck with your new adventures out there. And I look forward to seeing some more of those interesting images and videos of all these firefighting planes and stuff you got out there on your site.
Yeah, there's some
Thank you very
amazing
much.
pilots and people. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
I want to welcome my guest today, Michael Pinto, who is the CEO of Wonder Makers. Now, I've known Mike for quite a few years, and we've done quite a few trainings together over the years and been at many conventions. And he is a wealth of knowledge when it deals with indoor environments as far as sensitized individuals. And that's the purpose of having him here today. The recent outbreak of forest fires in Canada has really changed what's been going on, at least in the central to the eastern part of the United States. Now, I know California has its own issues with wildfires, but that hasn't reached us to this point. But this is a new situation with these fires, with the winds coming out of the north and northwest blowing straight down into the major population areas of the United States on the eastern coast. So I want to bring Mike in here and let him say a quick hello. And if there's anything I missed on the intro, Mike, please let me know, and whoever else is watching this know also. So, Mike, say hello.
Well, thanks, Lance. I appreciate being here very much. What I would say, however, is that it's not just the eastern coast. That smoke plume from the Canadian forest fires is literally cutting across a good section of the Midwest, too. So here in Michigan, we're not quite as bad as you guys out there on the East Coast, but it's not good either.
Well, I was going to ask you, you're obviously further north and closer to the Canadian border than I am. I'm in New Jersey. Is it affecting you, and how is it affecting your area?
Well, yes, it is affecting us. And as I said just a moment ago, it's not good. Anytime you get outdoor air quality that's worse than what you typically get inside, that's a whole flip on the issue in terms of the things that we're used to thinking about and even teaching in a lot of our classes, because the standard line from the EPA is that the outside air can be up to 20 times cleaner than the inside air, and people spend 90% of their time inside, and so bad indoor air can cause a real problem. And a lot of us in the industry are focused on that, and then when we are faced with a situation like this where the outside air is dangerous to people, and that is the case, it is literally dangerous to people, then what do? Where do you go to hide, so to speak? So it is impacting us here in the Midwest. The way that it sets up, there's kind of like an arc of smoke that's coming down from Canada, and we're on what would be the left-hand edge of that arc here in Michigan. And Lake Michigan seems to be the borderline in terms of keeping the clean air, over to Chicago and to the west. But right down through Michigan and Indiana and Ohio, and then over Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, the entire East Coast is pretty well hit right now by the residue from the forest fires.
Yeah, we've seen, especially wintertime with Lake Michigan, it creates its own weather systems. So I could see how that would become a border, keeping the weather at bay or the smoke at bay in that part. But, what's really interesting is all the news stations, that's all they're talking about now, the unhealthy air conditioning outside and inside that we have to deal with. And, this is kind of like the dirty water glass scenario. We know what's in the outdoor air and the indoor air all the time, and you can't see it, so nobody pays attention to it. Well, not nobody, we do, the industry people do. But if you were to hand somebody a glass of water that had a brown tinge to it, it was discolored, people wouldn't drink it because they could see it and they would know there was things in there that they don't want to take in, even though it does contain, mercury and all kinds of other nasty contaminants regularly. And the same thing that's happening now with the air quality, people can see it. And that's really, I think, what's jumping out and causing people to really take notice to what's going on. You're absolutely right. Normally, the outside air is much better than the inside air. So when people are inside, they normally go outside to breathe better, and they can't in this case. They have to hide inside. So that brings us to the sensitized people that we were talking about. This is something that's, very close and dear to you. We deal with it on a daily basis here at Normie with people that can't get help from regular assessors, remediators, people that are in the industry, which is why you have a class. You're the lead instructor, the NCRSI class, the class for sensitized individuals. Actually, it's teaching remediators how to deal with them. And also the certified mold professional, which is expanding even beyond that. So those are two of your specialties. And with that, maybe you can answer this question. How come the outside air right now, obviously beyond people being emotionally reacting to it, so troublesome for sensitized individuals, even more so than regular people?
Well, what I would start off with is saying that I think when you're dealing with outside air like we are today, everybody has to be concerned about it. The difference is that the sensitized individuals have to be concerned at a higher level than even the normal folks. So I'm sure you've heard over there on the East Coast, they're canceling certain sporting events and outdoor activities and things like that because the air just isn't healthy. And so you want to be, limiting your amount of exposure, just like we tell people in a, water damaged or mold damaged house. Sometimes they have to get out of that house to protect their health. The problem here, of course, as we've been talking about, where do you go if it's the whole outside that's contaminated by the forest fires? And so we're literally looking at it, flipping the whole script upside down, if you will. We now have to think about the houses and the air in the houses being a refuge for the people from what they're potentially going to be exposed to on the out of doors. And for the sensitized individual, it's even more significant for them because a lot of times we talk about mold sensitized individuals, and that's where it starts. But virtually every sensitized individual that I'm familiar with and have worked with over 20 plus years now, they develop cross sensitivities. So they start out with a mold exposure that causes a decrease in their health, and then they become sensitive to other things. They become sensitive to tobacco smoke that they weren't sensitive to before. They become sensitive to some of the chemicals like, low levels of formaldehyde in the home that perhaps they weren't sensitive before. Perfumes, all sorts of things. They develop these cross sensitivities. And when we're dealing with the outside air that's impacted by the wildfires, it's particulates, it's volatile organic compounds, and it's gases. So if they're cross-sensitive to anything, it's going to be in one of those categories, and then they're going to have problems with it. So that's really the issue.
I have a few calls into different contacts at different labs that we normally use, especially the ones that deal with VOCs, the volatile organic compounds. And I'm waiting on those callbacks that we just made recently. But I'm looking for what might be in this new smoke plume that we're getting that could be so offensive to people with and without sensitivities. I don't know if you know any of the chemistries that may be involved with this, though I have noticed the burning odor, and it's different than normal. This isn't like a wood fireplace or a fire pit.
Right, and some of that is going to be dependent upon what sort of forest are burning, whether they're hardwoods or evergreens, things like that. The evergreen forest, which is a good share of what's burning up in Canada right now, because they're closer to the Arctic Circle and that sort of stuff. So those are going to have a lot more PAHs, aromatic hydrocarbons in them, and that's from the oils and everything that's burning in the pine trees and the spruce trees and that sort of stuff. So then you're also going to get a whole chemical stew, if you will, from that, because depending on the temperature and whether they're exposed to actual flame or just the heat from it, where it is, whether it's protected by the bark, all these other things, you just get this massive amount of organic compounds that get liberated into the air during these fires. And then the ash and the smoke, which is basically both of those are small particulates, those tend to sometimes be even more airborne than the VOCs, because the chemicals can be a little sticky and a little heavy. But when they attach to these small ash particles, then they're transported, as we're finding out, thousands of miles into the airstream. The heat of the forest fire pushes them up a mile or more, and then they're in the airstream and they're heading downstream. But by the time that it gets to New York City or Kalamazoo, Michigan, where I am, or things like that, most of the gases, the carbon monoxide, the excess carbon dioxide, the nitrogen compounds and that sort of stuff, that's pretty well mixed and diluted. So the two things that are impacting the folks there on the East Coast and the sensitized individuals are mostly going to be those volatile organic compounds, which are those PAHs and particles. So,
on a small scale, I've been involved with emergency medical services for almost 50 years. And I've seen over the years people having severe reactions to being around a fire pit or a campfire. And when you start to look into it, you find out that it wasn't from the wood that they're burning. It was from the accidental dumping of poison ivy into the fire pit that was still around some of the logs. And as they burn the poison ivy, it's aerosolizing and getting encased in that smoke, and they're inhaling that and having severe reactions to it.
Well, and then think of everything else that's going on there. The PAHs I was talking about, the first word for the P is phenols. So there's all these different phenolic compounds that are getting burned up, and that's your oils, and that's your your irritants, like you were talking about with the poison ivy. But remember, forest fires don't stay forest fires. I mean, they run across roads, and they literally will melt the tar on an asphalt road, and sometimes the roads actually start to burn. So now you've got all of that oil product, anything that's a building in the way, or a vehicle that gets trapped in the fire, or a house. Of course, you're going to have all of the man-made products, artificial products that then burn. That all goes up in the air, and comparatively, that may be a small percentage of what's burning, but from the sensitized individual, that can actually be a bigger issue sometimes than just the individual smoke particles. Like you said, it's what attaches to the smoke particles. And then those smoke particles are so small, they get breathed in, they go deep into the lungs. And that whole combination, small particles going deep into the lungs and small particles carrying, pardon the expression, crap deep into the lungs. That's not a scientific term there, by the way, Lance. That's just a common term. But there's so much stuff that's on it. It's hard to know from breath to breath what's actually being taken in. And so, again, caution is the byword for anyone, but particularly for the sensitized individuals.
You know, in the remediation industry, in the meteorological industry, they refer to things, especially with hurricanes, hide from the wind, run from the water, because of the amount of damage that can be done. You can hide from the wind, take shelter of that, but in water you can't. Water's going to seep into everything. But we're dealing with something that's unique here because we're 1,000 miles away from these fires and we are severely being affected. So running isn't really a realistic situation. I think knowledge is something that would help. People understanding the risks, understanding, you know, well, maybe today's not the day to go outside and, you know, cut my grass, you know, and spend a good 2 hours or 3 hours out there in this serious weather or this heavy fog of smoke. And understanding that will definitely help people. But forecasting this is also an issue. So where could people go to find out how bad their area is and what their risks are to being outside?
Well, I'm sure everybody has their own favorite sources, and there's, you know, weather channels and local governments and state governments, and everybody's kind of jumping on the bandwagon. The one that I use, and it's just, again, my favorite because it's going to be there anytime you have these wildfires and stuff, is a federal government website, and that is, let me make sure I've got it here so that everybody knows, fire.airnow, as in AIRNOW.gov, fire.airnow.gov. And that one's really cool because you punch on that and it brings up a map of basically North America, and it shows where the plume is coming down with the smoke, where the air quality is being impacted, and then it rates it at each you know, major city, and it's not even just major, it's each you know, fairly significant size city has a dot on it that's either green, which means that it's good air quality, or yellow, which means it's questionable. And then most people think, well, then you get to red and that's bad. But this map actually goes 2 other levels. It goes to like purple and to black. And I looked yesterday, Lance had it, and knowing where you are in New Jersey, I just kind of looked to see where you are, blew it up to look and see in your location. You guys were black. So you're in the heart of it right now.
Yeah, yesterday was really bad. This morning it wasn't too bad, but then we did get an alert that it was going to be going downhill as the day went on. And looking outside now, in June, not a cloud in the sky, it looks like sunset. So, you know, it's that dark. I do have a question. If you were speaking to sensitized individuals as your customers or as a group, what would you tell them to do? I mean, normally, if they're inside their home and they're having reactions to that, they go outside. Now they have to stay inside. So what can they do now that they're in their environments that sometimes give them trouble anyways?
Well, I'm going to approach that from 2 different perspectives, if that's okay. The first one, and I don't mean to sound like I told you so, but you do have to understand, if you're a sensitized individual, it's important for you to take steps now to get your indoor environment clean, because we don't know when we're going to have situations like this where all of a sudden, with, you know, from no fault of our own, like you said, 1,000 miles away, they got a forest fire and it's having a serious impact on us. And if for some reason our sensitized individuals are saying, well, it's not that bad, and, you know, if it does get real bad or if it gets damper in the house, I can always go outside or whatever it is, that deferred maintenance or that deferred decision making really is going to have a serious negative impact on them in situations like this. because there may just be times where you can't get away, get away from the problems in your house by leaving your house. You outside, you may be actually facing greater problems than you have in your house. So the first item is just never defer, fixing things that you can fix now until some later date, just because it doesn't seem important to you.
Well, it's the clean glass of water. It's not a concern because you don't see a problem. As soon as it's, brownish or discolored, now it's on your mind. Same thing with the air.
Yep, exactly right. But it would be the same thing. That's why they have, on occasion you'll have boil water orders as well, right? They don't know exactly what's wrong with the water system. And so they tell people to boil the water. That's why one of the things that they chat about even in front of hurricanes and things is get a few cases of bottled water so that you can survive, a couple of days if you have to without having water coming out of your tap. Fix your house. If you know you've got things going on in your house that are contaminants or whatever, get rid of those, fix it, do the remediation properly so that you've got a good, safe place to be. And then you can, potentially survive a little bit better during these outdoor air quality incidents. But putting that aside, because at some point that's water under the dam. Either they have fixed it or they haven't fixed it, but now they're still facing what's going on outside. So the first thing, and the first couple here, I'm just repeating the standard safety precautions that you're going to get from just about any site. If you don't have to go outside or you can limit your time outside, don't go outside and limit your time outside. If you do go outside, wear some sort of respiratory protection. I know that I'm seeing a lot of information where people are talking about, you can use your COVID mask and stuff like that. And the answer is, the face masks that were being sold as COVID protection, I won't get into that whole discussion all over again, but that is not going to be appropriate, particularly for the sensitized individuals. At a minimum, they're going to need like an N95, and we recommend N99 or N100 filtering face pieces. So that's going to protect a lot coming in. And remember too that a entry spot for some of this contamination into your body is not just the nose and mouth, but the eyes as well. And fire residue is even worse because of the small particle. So when those get into your eyes and then get diluted by the tears and everything, it actually releases some of those chemicals that are on the particle itself. So the particle may wash out, and get it out of our eyes and everything. But what is left behind and what's being absorbed in through your eyes is some of the chemicals and stuff. So remembering to wash your face when you come in from the outside, wearing a mask to protect yourself, changing clothes if you've been outside for any length, you're not carrying a lot of this stuff in. A lot of similar things that we would talk about if you're coming in from a moldy environment or trying to protect yourself from a moldy environment.
You mentioned about masks, and again, I agree. I don't want to go down that path and let's talk about masks, good or bad, but just to remind people that just because you're wearing a mask, whether it's an N95, N99, N100, half-face mask with cartridges, it doesn't protect you from the gases. You're getting filtration from particulates only. Now, that's a good and a bad thing, because especially if you are a sensitized individual, you may also have additional health issues and stuff. You're wearing a mask that's doing a good job filtering particulates. You're going to reduce the amount of air that you can actually breathe in without straining. And again, if you're not trained to wear a mask, if you're not trained to know when you need to take the mask off, when to replace the mask, it could be just as serious as not having a mask. So again, training, preparing, I guess, is kind of in the same thing that you were talking about.
Well, a little bit, although I would say in this particular case, as I mentioned earlier, by the time the contamination, goes 100 miles, 1,000 miles, whatever it is, the gaseous portions of that, we're not generally seeing high concentrations of carbon monoxide or even the elevated levels of the nitrogen oxides and stuff like that by the time it hits like New York City or something like that. So wearing the filtering protecting mask is actually a very good step, because as I said, even some of the phenols and the aromatic hydrocarbons, the volatile organic compounds, a lot of those are vapors. So that means that they're liquids that have been, the heat has evaporated and they're small droplets in the air. Then those droplets hang on to the particulates, and then the particulates get screened out by the mask. So that N95 is actually doing a fairly decent job stopping the vapors, which again have coalesced onto the particles, and the particles. And then, as I said before, the gases have pretty much dissipated. So I'm rather optimistic that the filtering face pieces, at least the good ones, can be a real benefit to individuals, and particularly to people who are sensitized.
Well, that's a good piece of info for people to deal with. And again, if I just want to follow up, if you are wearing a mask and don't feel well, you may need to take it off, at least short term, and stop whatever activities you're doing. I think that's the real message. Try to get to where you feel comfortable and safe and stay that way until this passes.
Yeah. So something else I'm going to throw in, not a lot of people know this or remember this, but if you're wearing a mask, you need to be intentional about improving your liquid uptake, meaning you need to drink more water, people. And part of that is because the mask not only does a good job screening these particles and stuff, but it does filter out some of the water vapor. And so therefore you're breathing drier air, and the drier air is going to allow whatever particles do get through to go deeper into your system. And by drinking more water, you're going to keep your mucous membranes, hydrated, and, a little bit more ability to collect some of those particles, and then even to flush them through your system. There's pretty good studies that show that people who are being exposed to the wildfire smoke over a course of a few days will build up levels of different toxins in their body. And a lot of times that's just because they're not drinking enough water to flush them out. And I know several people, particularly in the naturopath and the integrated medicine field, who say green tea in particular, water and or green tea can be helpful in terms of just detoxing some of that stuff that's getting into your, first into your bloodstream and then into your internal organs and stuff, just because of the contaminants in the air.
Well, just kind of on a side note, going in a slightly different direction, and I agree with what you're saying, and I just wanted to mention that wildfires, forest fires, things like this are not the only thing that cause these types of contaminations in the air that affect people and sensitize individuals. If you remember back, we had some recent volcanoes that had erupted and put so much ash into the air. It was affecting people thousands of miles away. It grounded air traffic through Europe for around a week. So there's a lot of things that are in the air that are going to affect people, and the sensitized group, many times over, even more.
So I want to pick up on that as well. I mean, one of the reasons that they ground airliners in situations like this, either because of the wildfire or the volcanoes, is because of the aggressive nature of those small particles, particularly as they're compressed and put through a jet engine. They can score and damage the insides of those to the point where they can actually have engine failure. And if you think about that, if these particles are corrosive enough that they're damaging stainless steel parts, they can't be good for our lungs. So just lots of warnings to us. There's plenty of evidence around, even just common sense evidence, that would tell us that we shouldn't be exposed to a lot of this. And you were asking earlier, some of the other things people can do. Obviously, if you have whole house HVAC and if you've got filters on the HVAC, you can run the HVAC system even if you just run it on fan, because that, you know, pushes the air into the house and through the system. And typically most home air systems and HVAC systems, unless they have a energy recovery ventilator or heat recovery ventilator or something like that, that's intentionally bringing air in. Typically those are, you know, only bringing in 10% outside air. High efficiency furnaces, the ones that have the PVC pipes instead of like the chimneys and stuff, again, those are going to bring in minimal outside air unless they're on the heat cycle, where they bring in the air obviously to dilute the you know, the gases that are being created when they burn the gas or the oil for the furnace. So if you're on the air conditioning mode and you've got a high efficiency furnace and you've got decent filters on it, running that and just running it even on the fan on the on switch rather than on the auto switch will make should make a good difference. Now, I also want to point out the people who have portable air conditioners, window mount air conditioners, some of these other ones that have, you know, pipes that go in and out and everything, what they call pack units, like you see on the wall of a hotel. Oof, that's tough because there's very little filtration on those. And that's a lot of times bringing in 10, 20, 30% outside air just automatically as you turn those on.
Well, most
So-
commercial buildings are spec that way. They have to bring in 15 to 20% fresh air. So they're dealing with those issues also.
And I'm not going to get into the whole discussion of the energy efficiency that may not be the energy efficiency,
Right.
but you know, they build the building so tight that they do have to bring in more of the outside air. And then in conditions like this, Lance, you know this as well as I do, they don't have the filtration on those big HVAC units like we have even on a smaller residential unit. So that's a tougher way to go on some of that. But at the same time, that brings up the last main point that I wanted to make, and that is that sometimes we can't rely, you know, if you're a person or you're staying in a hotel because of, you know, your job that took you there to New York City and all of this or whatever it is, sometimes you have to be a little bit more proactive, and particularly if you're sensitized. We talk about creating a refuge, even if you can't fix your whole house. You know, is there a bedroom? Is there a den? Is there a room in your house that you can turn into a refuge that's going to have better air quality and protect you? And this advance, I mean, I'm just blown away. The advance in the air purification systems, which we call proactive air purification, where you're not just relying on it to go through a filter to collect this stuff. You've got ionizers and you know, one of the better ones I think is this multi-cluster ionization and things. These sorts of products can help create these reservoirs of clean air inside a building, so that even if you have to run the air conditioner and it's bringing in some of this contaminant and your filters aren't the greatest, at least you can protect yourself in a bedroom where you spend, you know, 8 hours a night when you're sleeping and things like that. That can be a big difference.
You know, it's not a new concept. I mean, they teach and talk about that for hurricanes and tornadoes, you know, to have a safe area in your home, a place that's protected from, you know, from things coming through the exterior walls. Well, this is just taking it to another level where you're going to keep your breathable air as clean as possible.
Well, I like that analogy. I mean, you're in those cases, you know, for a tornado. So here in the Midwest, we don't have the hurricanes as much, but it's a tornado. And that's exactly what they tell you. You need to have a secure location that in the case of a tornado, you can go into and be better protected from, you know, the damaging effects of the wind. And in a situation like this, particularly the people who are already at risk because they're sensitized, they need to have, you know, think about having that secure location from an air standpoint, just like we would think about having a secure location from a weather standpoint. And doing that with some of these proactive air purifiers, Heck, I was looking at the Best Living Systems website yesterday. They've got plug-in models. I mean, literally just plug into an outlet and is enough to, have some air cleansing that's going on in a room size. They got ones that are the size of, like a sports bottle or a drinking glass that's designed to fit in a cup holder in a car to improve the air quality in a car. But you can plug those in and use those in a hotel room or in a bedroom or something like that. And these are not necessarily, super expensive items or anything like that. They're reasonably priced and they're worth it.
You know what? And everything you're talking about comes down to do something, improve your condition, be proactive yourself to try to take care of the environment you're in, stay in a healthier and a safer place during conditions like this. And it's going to happen more and more. We didn't really talk about statistics, but from the Weather Channel, they ran some stats yesterday saying that year to date, they have burned up in Canada and the US. Well, let me rephrase that. The yearly average for the US and Canada on forest fires is between 6.5 and 7.5 million acres. The fires so far to date in Canada are 9.3 million. So they're 50% over the yearly total of burned up forest and what it's putting into the air that we're all breathing and changing weather conditions around the world.
And we're in June.
And we're in June. And it's
That's
first
right.
going to get hot and the fire season is going to first come on. And then we got California to deal with and the West Coast. Prepare yourselves, people. Be proactive and take care.
Well, that's what I said. Just if there's things that you can fix now, fix them. If there's things that you can do to prepare for, because this one from Canada, hopefully by the middle of next week, we'll have moved on with some shifting weather patterns. Don't just go back to normal and say, that one's over. I don't have to worry about it, because something's going to happen again. And those who are already suffering, those who are kind of on an edge health-wise, sometimes I talk to my clients about being literally almost like standing on a knife's edge. And we want to get you off of that edge so that you don't fall over into a worse scenario. And the way to do that is it's pretty tough to, have the proactive air purifier when you're in the middle of a problem. So you may have to get one now. Let me just also finish with this. I know it's the fire issues and everything, but I'm a victim of my own thinking, so to speak. Neither my wife or I both of us are blessed that we don't have a lot of mold sensitivities or anything like that, even with all the crazy work I've done in the industry. And neither one of us really have expressed a lot of allergies over the years. And this summer, or actually this spring, over the last couple of months, I noticed that my wife was feeling less and less normal, so to speak. And finally, when we dug into it, it was turned out that she was having some respiratory issues and some stuff like that. And the initial doctor visit was, yeah, it's a really awful pollen season. We never followed the pollen ratings or anything because she was never, identified as being allergic. And once we got the idea that she was, being impacted by the outdoor pollen, not something that was going on in our house, ended up getting one of the Chaos air purifiers that Normie recommends. And within hours, she was telling me that she was feeling better running that in the house. And within 2 days, she had already given it to her sister and made me buy her another one. So that's just how it
Okay,
goes.
then. Well, the stuff works. And, that's the whole thing. And we always talk about, even, tongue in cheek, about you either have a good filter or you are one. And it's all about protecting that you are one. You want to have as much protection around you as you can. But we are going to end this segment. I do want to thank you for your time. And I didn't mention it earlier, but this is one of the segments that we're doing in a multi-part presentation on the seriousness of the wildfires, how it's affecting the U.S. and people with sensitivities, without sensitivities, and what they can do. So hopefully you'll tune in and some of the other segments as we show them. And I want to thank you again for your time. It's always great talking to you, Mike.
Bless you, Lance. It was good. I hope it was helpful for people.
Thank you. I want to welcome Douglas Hoffman, the Executive Director of NORMI, which is the National Organization of Remediators and Microbial Inspectors, to our episode today. And for those of you that have been following us, we've been doing interviews with influential people in the indoor air quality, outdoor air quality, and firefighting arena, all dealing with the wildfires coming out of Canada. So Doug, welcome.
Hey, thank you. Good to be here.
I'm glad to have you. You know, you have an extensive background in building science. And one of the things that came up with some of the interviews that we've been going through since the wildfires in Canada started affecting the central and middle part of the US is, what do people do? You know, you can't stop breathing. You know, that's just not an option. You know, people can go, we've talked about this earlier, you know, 20 to 40 days without food. They can go 3 to 7 days without water, 4 to 6 minutes without air. So no option there. So you have to be able to continue to breathe. So we normally have people that complain about indoor air quality without smoke, without all these other external things going on. What can people do to try to help themselves when they're in conditions like this, where you can't go outside, where the air is normally better than inside?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Lance, because it's funny because it seems as though sometimes when these kinds of things happen, all of a sudden something that we actually should face and should deal with every single day, all of a sudden now becomes a real problem. We don't think a lot about the air that we're breathing inside because, frankly, we can't see it. And because we can't see it, because there's not a cloud or a haze in our indoor environment, we don't think much about what it is that we're actually breathing. I've talked about that sometimes with the bottled water. Do you know what's in the bottled water you drink? Well, if you can't see it, you're not terribly concerned. And so one of the things that then piques our interest is when we do identify something, either by an odor or by something that we see that's floating around in the air. Now, all of a sudden, it becomes an issue. You know, in our classes, we talk a lot about this shaft of light that you see in the morning. You don't typically see all that stuff floating around, and so you don't think about it. But in a shaft of light, when the light's beaming in and you see all these little submicron particles flying around, you're thinking, okay, what is this stuff that I'm actually breathing? And so now we're in a situation where all of a sudden I'm smelling inside of my house something that I shouldn't be smelling inside of my house, a forest fire. You know, where is that coming from? And why is it that I'm smelling it inside of my house? And I think it's interesting when you think about the way houses are constructed today, or buildings, even commercial buildings are constructed today. It really isn't surprising that we are beginning to smell inside the contaminants that we're seeing outside. And some people live close to paper mills, for instance, and they're going to notice that there's something going on outside. Now, all of a sudden, they smell it inside. Now it's an issue. Now, how do I deal with it?
Well, you know, to put it into context that everybody's going to understand, you gave the example of a bottle of water. Well, that water is filtered and processed. The indoor air quality isn't. And because of that, you're running into issues with people having to visualize a problem. If that bottled water was brown or cloudy, nobody would drink it. If their air is cloudy or brown, they don't have a choice. You still have to breathe. So what do you do?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Well, of course, I think the main thing is trying to figure out where that's coming from inside of the house. How is it getting into the house? And are there things I can do that can actually mitigate that? And one of the big differences in the way I look at building construction from, I know some builders do, is they talk about a house being able to breathe. I'm not altogether sure that they know exactly what they're saying when they say that. Does a house need to breathe? Well, it certainly needs to have balanced pressure of some sort, but if the house is pulling in things from the outside, say it's under negative pressure, you're creating a vacuum inside the house. What is it that you're pulling in from the outside, and where are those contaminants coming from? You know, the smoke that we smell is not just a problem because we're smelling it. I'm sure you've already addressed through some of the people that you've talked with, there are some pretty strong contaminants in that smoke that we're breathing. And how do you mitigate that? How do you keep that from coming inside of your house? So I have a couple of suggestions that might help when you start thinking about things like air infiltration issues, the idea of fresh air makeup. Fresh air makeup, of course, is a great idea to bring air in from the outside through your air conditioning system. But the question is there a way to reduce that or to mitigate that? So I have some ideas that I might be able to share here that people could do pretty quickly to begin to seal off what's going on the outside. That's at least one step, and that's to begin to seal up that environment so that you're not bringing stuff in from the outside.
That was one of the questions and concerns that came up when I actually did an episode with Michael Pinto over sensitized individuals, that normally indoor air quality is up to 10 times worse than the outside air. So people that are sensitized, which is like 20% of the population, they go outside to feel better. When the outside is, so choked with smoke from forest fires, thousands of miles away, what do? Now you got to retreat back to the area that's a problem.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So for sensitized individuals, one of the methods that we use to determine how are those things getting inside the house is by doing what's called a blower door test. And essentially what they do is they take off the front door and they'll install a door that has a gigantic fan on it. And then they'll turn that fan on and put the house under negative pressure. Essentially, what you're doing is you're creating a vacuum inside of the home. And guess what happens when you do that? Now, all of a sudden, you're pulling air in through the cracks and crevices around the windows, cracks and crevices around the doors, places that you don't really even think about. A lot of people don't realize that wall cavities, exterior wall cavities, actually breathe. And what I mean by that is that moisture and vapor will actually move through those walls. And so now all of a sudden, when that house is set up under negative pressure, and you run a blower door test, created that vacuum, now what you're doing is you're even pulling it through the electrical outlets. And whatever is in that wall cavity is now coming into the air that you breathe. And that may sound really like, that's a little too detailed for me. Do I really need to be that concerned? But that's the answer as to where are those things coming from. They're coming from the outside. Even if you kept your doors and windows closed, you're still going to smell that smoke that's from the outside. And whatever that smoke is carrying, you're actually going to be breathing.
I'm in New Jersey, and we were directly affected by the smoke coming out of Canada from the fires. And 4:00 in the afternoon, the sun's high in the sky. We went through 3 days of not a cloud in the sky, and it looked like sunset. I have some incredible pictures of that. But because of that, trying to close up your house and make it airtight doesn't seem to work either. There's got to be a balance. There's got to be some way that you can survive inside and out other than just running away from the entire part of the country.
Well, I wish there was an easier answer, but there really isn't. I think that you do have to do the best you can to seal up those cracks and crevices with weather stripping, with caulking. They make a little product called a door saddle that fits on the bottom of the door, where you can slide that down and tighten up the threshold so that there's not air coming in from underneath the door. I think once you do that, of course, just as we've always said, it's got to be a holistic solution. That's at least part of the problem. But if you can take the time to seal off some of those entry points where the smoke is coming in from the outside, then you can address the indoor air quality with good filtration, good purification, those kinds of things that are more proactive in terms of oxidizing those contaminants that are in the air. So it definitely can be done. I think it's just maybe a little more effort than most people are willing to take. I think they'd almost rather go to the mall.
During those 4 days that we had the really bad smoke conditions here, I have monitors all over the place. I have outside monitors, inside monitors for my air quality and conditions. And I have one unit called a Fubot, which I know you're familiar with, in my office. I intentionally in my office did not run air purification, and I had a door open. I was keeping it open to the outside. The thing was glowing so bright orange. You probably saw it from Louisiana. It was just, the air quality was absolutely awful. In the house, where I kept doors, windows closed, and ran a lot of purification technologies, very proactive stuff, it was really fine. There was no odor inside the house. Whether I think we went a little bit on the positive pressure side, which would have helped with that also, keeping everything out. But there was a tremendous difference with that. I have graphical readings that I actually show in an interview with Dr. Gavin McGregor Skinner that shows in the morning before the smoke hit the first day, everything was very low, almost not detectable on outdoor air quality. And as it hit, it spiked really high and stayed there for almost 4.5, 5 days. Slowly started to go away. But, it went away. And again, people go back to the out of sight, out of mind philosophy. I don't see this going away. There's a film all over everything that's out there, from the smoke, the ash that was out. What kind of concerns are there for long-lasting effects from the stuff that people have breathed in and what's still out there?
Well, I think I think that's a really good point. Of course, I'm not a medical doctor, but I do know that people who are breathing poor quality air over a long period of time typically are going to have some pretty negative health effects. I mean, you think about all the people that have suffered from their efforts to solve the problems during 9/11, all of the people that suffered after Hurricane Katrina, and they were in these contaminated environments working and they weren't protecting themselves at all. That there's got to be some long range concerns about those contaminants that are still hanging out. So I think the key is, for me, would be to do the best I can while it's going on right now, but do the best I can to keep the surfaces clean, to keep the air clean, to keep the air purified and filtered, to do the best I can now so that I can offset the potential for what might be a buildup of contamination over a long period of time. I remember reading several years ago in Reader's Digest about a single cigarette producing over 4,000 chemical gases, 43 of which are carcinogenic. And the article went on to say, interestingly enough, that secondhand smoke that a person would be breathing who's not smoking was in some cases more dangerous than the person who was smoking, that it was affecting the person who was breathing that smoke worse than it was affecting the person who was actually doing the smoking. So I think there's a lot for us to learn long term, but at least to begin with, I think the answer is, what can I do right now to make sure that I'm creating the cleanest environment that I possibly can? Because one of the things that I do have control over, may not have any control over what's going on outside, but I certainly have control over what's going on inside. And as well as I do that there are ways that we can do that that will make sure that we're breathing the best air that we can breathe in spite of what's going on outside.
I just want to change directions real quick because I did another episode with Dan Reese. He's let me get his title. He is a wildfire strategist and an aviation advisor dealing with wildfires. And we spoke at length about some of the things that are going on out there, the lack of education, what people don't understand and know. And I said, what are you concerned about? And he talked about the two different types of wildfires. One is where it's burning a forest, putting smoke in the air from the trees, the brush, and stuff like that. The other type is when it's burning a forest and starts burning homes and businesses and factories and putting all of these other unknown chemistries in the air.
Right.
It takes it to a whole nother level. Now, in my area, they were talking about every news channel wearing your N95 mask or your N100 mask. Well, that's fine for larger particulates, but it's not going to do anything for the gases or the chemicals that are in the air. They go right through it like you're not wearing a mask whatsoever. Where's the concern on that?
Yeah, I think we know that, don't we? I mean, we all went through COVID where we were wearing masks, and yet we could still smell a lot of what was going on around us, and the heavy perfume that somebody was wearing. So I think we got a pretty good education on the ineffectiveness of masking for smallest particles, the smaller submicron particles, and for the gases that are in the air. So again, I don't know that there's an actual solution. I mean, I'm not the kind of guy that's going to walk around outside in a hazmat outfit, But the truth is that I think the recommendation that they made about staying inside is really not a bad one. If you can stay inside and you can control the air that you're breathing inside, if you don't have to go outside, then there's not a reason to, because you're exactly right. I think the thing that concerns me about these kinds of fires are all of the other contaminants that are in the air besides just the wood burning particulate.
Absolutely. And, one final comment on the masks. Wearing a mask is going to help, but you can't get that full sense of security saying, oh, I'm wearing a mask, I'm protected, because you're only protected from some of the larger particulate, not the gases, the chemicals, and everything else, just like viruses would go right through a mask. So that's a definite concern. So without rebuilding your house, preparing for the next time the wind shifts and blows the fire smoke this way, which it's going to happen again, just because of weather conditions and everything else, what can people do?
Well, so several years ago, you probably remember the Colorado fires, and we had a lot of contact with some folks that actually lived there. In fact, one of our real good friends lost their family cabin from the Colorado fires. They lived in Colorado, but they also had a separate place, which was their cabin, and it just burned to the ground. And as soon as those fires started, we sent them some proactive air purification technologies. And I don't know how much you want to talk about that, or if you've got other people you want to talk about those technologies. But I'll tell you that I'm convinced that that's one of the first things that somebody could do to deal with the particulates and the chemicals and the odors, something holistically, proactively that could be put in the environment to actually purify the air. So I think those two things kind of go hand in hand. One is do the best you can to seal up the environment with, again, weather stripping, caulking, saddles on the doors, exterior doors to close up the thresholds and keep those tighter. Put on insulators on the electrical outlets to make sure you're not pulling air in from the wall cavities. Those kinds of things to me is absolutely a first step. And then the second step would be make sure that I've got really, really good air purification technology, something that's got a good HEPA filter, got a good PCO technology or ionization technology that's going to get rid of those chemicals and those odors and those particulates. Something holistically, proactively dealing with the air quality. That's where I would be.
I agree with you completely. Actually, I did an interview for one of the segments with Michael Pinto. I think I may have mentioned that. And besides just talking about the sensitized individuals, we talked about, and I don't want to talk too much about the episode, but a safe room. You know, just like you would have for a tornado or a hurricane or a severe event going on, one smaller area that you can protect even more than the other areas. And that's something else you can do depending on your situation.
You know, the interesting thing about this is just from every kind of, like I said, I'm not a health professional, but I do know that one of the reasons why we do so well when we sleep well is because when we sleep well, it builds up our immune system. It strengthens us when we get a really good night's sleep. And I feel the same way about our indoor environments. If I can create a safe environment in which I can breathe good quality, clean air, at least as good as I can, compared to what might be going on outside, or just like drinking purified water over a long period of time, when I'm exposed to that bad water at the restaurant or somewhere else one time, it's not going to affect me because my immune system is strong enough to be able to deal with those periodic times that I'm having to deal with contamination. So I think in the long run, it's creating a lifestyle in which I'm creating the cleanest, healthiest, safest indoor environment I can for myself in every way that I can, so that when those times come where I can't control the environment, at least my defenses are up to a point and my immune system is strong enough that I can deal with those issues. And I think that's the idea of the safe room. I'm big on creating a safe house.
And I agree. You know, it's like layers of an onion. You just keep putting more layers of protection out there to help and keep you in the best possible situation that you can be in.
That's right.
So Mayor, I believe it was Adams from New York City, talked about good filters or putting a filter in their house. Again, it's a step, it's a layer, but does it really deal with all of it?
No, and I think that's sometimes the wrong impression is left. I remember back during COVID, you probably remember too, Dr. Fauci talked about going and getting a filter. Nothing wrong with getting a filter. I mean, a HEPA filter is a HEPA grade filter is a great product to use to take larger particulate out of the air. In some cases, smaller particulate, depending on how effective it is. But in terms of indoor air quality, there's got to be something in addition to that that will actually oxidize a lot of the smaller chemicals and viruses and those sorts of things. So I think you've got to take it to the next level, and that's the idea of having more holistic solution than just having a filter. I kind of laughed the other day, Lance. I was looking at somebody that had actually built an air purifier. This was their concept of an air purifier. They took 4 filters and taped them together, large filters like you would have in your air conditioning system. They took 4 of them, taped them together in a box, like a cube, and then put a box fan on top of it. And they said, see, we're sucking the air through the filters and now everything's great.
You know, it's that dual track or partial logic that people fall into. You know, the people that were wearing the paper towel masks when COVID came out. See, I have a mask on.
Exactly.
Yes, you do. Is it doing anything for you? No. And that's kind of where we're at with this. People have to be very cautious as to their information sources. I mean, the internet's out there for everybody, but somebody says, here's a widget that'll take care of this for you. Well, it takes care of a part of it, but is that enough? Is that enough for you to now say, I'm wearing my paper mask and I'm going to go out into the smoke-filled environment because I'm wearing my mask?
Yeah.
It does nothing for your eyes or even filter anything. So it's a concern that, you know, people look for reliable sources of information, you know, and think through the process. Again, the dirty glass of water, you know, the cloudy water, you're not going to drink that, but if I filter it, the chemicals are still going to be in there. Yeah,
Right.
you're just not going to see the sediment that makes it look bad. Same thing with the smoke. The statistics as of now on the fires in the United States and in Canada separately, they both burn between 6.5 and 7.5 million acres of forest a year. It's a massive amount. To date, not even 6 full months through the year, Canada's burned almost 9.5 million acres. So it's 1.5 times in 6 months instead of 12 what they've burned so far.
Incredible.
California right now has had a shift in weather. I was just talking, like I said, with Dan from California, and he says that the weather out there is gorgeous. It's cooler, it's not that hot, but that's going to change. And this is just what's happening. In the Northeast, we haven't had rain here in 3.5, almost 4 weeks. It is bone dry out. A small brush fire right now could become a very large concern. And again, the air quality, the ash that's already out there, the film on the cars, the film that people keep stirring up when they walk out there, we're still breathing that, even though it looks nice out. So keep that in mind.
Well, I wish people would talk more about indoor air quality and as much as they talk about outdoor air quality, because again, indoor air quality is something that you can control. Outdoor air quality, a little more difficult.
Well, you know what the biggest problem that we've always talked about with indoor air quality is people become nose blind. 5 minutes in your environment, you don't smell the odor that somebody coming over would say, oh, what is that smell? You go, what smell? What are you talking about? And outdoors is completely different because it's so large. It's not where you feel closed in and you're breathing, which is fine. The only time people complain is when they see the yellow forming on their cars from the pollen, when those pollen seasons hit. But other than that, people take it for granted that it's always going to be there for them.
Yeah.
That's the false sense of security of the paper mask, or it's always going to be good until it isn't.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Well, I think we've got an opportunity to address this in a very positive way. And the truth is that if people would take the time to create cleaner, safer, healthier indoor environments, that's going to be long lasting. And that's going to help them in a lot of different ways when the next issue comes our way.
Absolutely. Doug, I appreciate you spending the time with us here today.
Great
And
to talk to you.
And we will chat again in the future.
All right, man. Thank you. Have a great day.
You too. I want to welcome everybody today to another episode of Fire, More Than Flames and Smoke. And we have a special guest today, Alan Johnston. He's the founder of Green Tech Environmental, and he is a wealth of information on the science and technology side of controlling odors, controlling airborne and surface contaminants. And I just find it a privilege to have him here with us today. So Alan, if you'd like to say a quick hello, we'll get started.
Hi, Lance. Privileged to be with you as well today.
Thank you very much. Can you give us a real brief background, a little bit as your background of where you've come from and how we got to this point today?
Sure. My background is engineering. I'm a graduate of Purdue University in Indiana in electrical engineering, and I worked in the aerospace industry for 15 years on some exciting programs involving NASA, the space shuttle, and a lot of different missile systems that protect our country. I had the opportunity to enter the air purification industry in 1997, now over 25 years ago. And it was really a combination of factors, but one that really drove my interest was the loss of my mother, who ultimately passed away from mold exposure in a school that she taught in. And as an aerospace engineer, I had a hard time understanding how something like that could happen in the world that we live in with such great technologies available to us. And so I've dedicated the rest of my professional career to finding technologies that solve the problem of indoor air quality, and do it in a way that really mimics the way that the nature cleans the air outside.
Well, I don't know if you really know how many lives you've actually reached, but just from the technologies that you've worked on and put out into the market, it's countless. So I want to thank you for that. I know how it's affected my family, my friends that use these similar types of technologies. So again, thank you for all of that. But speaking of the technologies, why don't we get into some of them? I mean, the central and eastern part of the United States over the last week or so has really been impacted by fires coming out of Canada. And, out of sight, out of mind, we think of Canada hundreds, thousands of miles away, depending on where you're located, but it's having a direct influence on us. And the technologies that you've worked on and are familiar with are really the lifeline for many people that have breathing issues or just regular people that are reacting to the smoke. So I don't know if you want to just start talking about some of them, or if you want me to request. Why don't we go with what you're comfortable with?
Well, the technologies are obviously something that I am passionate about. I'm the founder of Green Tech Environmental and started that company almost 15 years ago now. And the object of the mission, I'd say, of our company is to find technologies that truly solve the problem, or not just a Band-Aid on them. And there are technologies that, as I said earlier, mimic what nature does outdoors. And I'll share some of those with you. This issue that we're having recently with wildfire smoke is certainly a significant, and it's a problem that pops up periodically, certainly every month of every year, somewhere around the world, and the United States had a chance to experience it, affecting as many as 100 million people here just in the last few weeks. It is toxic.
Can I interrupt you for 1 second? Because what you just mentioned, affecting 100 million people in the United States, this is a part of the country that's not normally affected. But one of the things that came out of this, because of the thickness of the smoke, we actually got a glimpse into what the starting of a nuclear winter would look like. And, it affected the overall climate. In New Jersey, which is where I'm from, the average temperature this time of the year is normally 80, 85 degrees. When the smoke was as thick as it was for those 4 days, we barely got to 70 degrees. It lowered the temperature almost 20 degrees a day. So it made a big difference, and that affects things going forward.
Makes a huge difference. And we see the same from volcano eruptions, although not something that we often see here in this country, but in other parts of the world, not uncommon. And it's a scary situation. But from what affects you and I, and what we're really concerned about, our health, the effect of what the constituents that make up that wildfire smoke, more than just what we can see, it's the chemical compounds that are inside of that smoke that are of real concern. I have the privilege to be on multiple boards of committees with ASHRAE, and ASHRAE is the standard that is set for heating and air conditioning and indoor air quality. And one of those standards is 52.2, which is the standard for filtration. And what you hear most about when someone talks about the concerns over health and wildfire smoke is PM 2.5 or particulate matter at 2.5 microns. And that is just one size particle. Obviously, wildfire smoke contains particles of virtually every size, up to particles that we can see very clearly. But scientists have really focused in on that one size because it's one that they they measure and have identified as one that can get into our lungs and get absorbed into our bloodstream and have a dramatic health effect. And so filtration becomes an important part of a solution to dealing with wildfire smoke indoors. I know that people are talking about setting up safe rooms within their homes, a place that they can go that will allow them to breathe and have a minimal effect from the wildfire smoke. And for those that have technologies that they put into these rooms, congratulations. It's something that we should all have to be able to have a safe haven. We never know when wildfires can hit. I'm sitting in Northeast Tennessee, not far from Gatlinburg, a beautiful, one of the most visited national parks, but was struck by a wildfire just a few years ago that took out thousands of acres and burned thousands of homes. Something that was unheard of because we just don't have many wildfires in this area, and we got a glimpse of what that can mean. It can strike anywhere, and preparedness is important. So as we've worked as a community within ASHRAE, developing standards for filtration, high quality HEPA type pleated filters that are able to filter out these ultrafine particles is very important. Most people don't have filtration in their home other than maybe on their HVAC system. And a lot of people are going out and buying 50 cents filters from Walmart. And one of the things that I would like to say right up front is don't do that. Invest in a quality filter that is pleated. There are a number of them out there that are MERV 7 rated filters, and that's generally what a typical HVAC system can handle. MERV ratings have to do with the effectiveness of the particle capturing ability. The higher the MERV rating, the tighter the weave, the less air flows through the filter. And one of the things that we can't do is typically on most systems put a HEPA type filter, which is MERV 13 and above. A true HEPA filter is MERV 16. HEPA type filters start around MERV 13. But those are very restrictive to airflow or